Most Americans have been paying close attention to the Iowa caucus, which, don't worry, I'm going to do a show on. But over the past few days, there have been several significant geopolitical developments which we ought to pay attention to. Iran seized an oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman a few days ago. Taiwan elected a new president who has vowed to retain Taiwan's autonomy from China, which is likely going to cause retaliation from the CCP. Iran also launched a ballistic missile strike near the United States consulate in Iraq. And of course, Houthi rebels in Yemen continue to launch missiles and drones into the Red Sea, impelling U.S. retaliatory airstrikes and causing major oil U.S. suppliers like Shell to suspend their shipping there. When one looks at each of these developments, it's hard not to notice that they are pieces of a broader and sobering reality. That is, that forces for evil far outnumber the forces for good in the world right now. Here today to make sense of these foreign events is geopolitical analyst and, of course, our friend of the show, Brandon Weichert. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Timeless and to the Julie Hartman YouTube channel in general. You can catch Dennis and Julie every Monday on this channel at 1 o'clock Pacific and 4 o'clock Eastern. And then Timeless is every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at the same time. And of course, you can listen to any of those shows on Apple and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. Brandon Weichert is a geopolitical analyst and a subject matter expert for the U.S. Department of the Air Force. He's written 3 books, all of which I have read, by the way. Winning Space, How America Remains a Superpower, Biohacked, China's Race to Control Life, and The Shadow War, Iran's Quest for Supremacy. He's also an energy analyst at the-pipeline.com, and he should also add to his bio that he is probably the most welcomed guest, most heavily appeared guest, I should say, because every guest here on the show is welcomed because he appears on Timeless so much. Brandon, welcome back to your favorite stomping grounds.
Well, thank you for having me, and that was a lovely intro, and thank you for constantly having me. It's always such a joy. Eventually I'll have to be in studio at one of these occasions.
I know, we've got to get you out here, but you know, whenever something crazy in the world happens and I need to make sense of it, I know who to call or who to summon on Twitter to come to the show. It's so funny. I bet other guests, if they're watching the show, are going, wait a minute, he's the most welcomed? Why are you giving all the welcoming love to Brandon? But you and Spencer Clavin, I think, are neck and neck for being the most heavily appeared. Yes.
I'm in good company then.
Yes, you certainly are. So, as you may know, Brandon, a few episodes ago, I did a 2024 predictions show, which is a little bold because, you know, I've been advised to not really do that on the air because if it doesn't come true, you don't look the smartest. But my whole argument is if it does come true, then you look like a genius. So I want to start off by telling you some of them and getting your grades on how well you think I may do in my predictions. And the reason I'm doing this, just so everyone is aware that it's not a total non sequitur, is that I think that many of my predictions, almost all of them were geopolitical, are kind of greater pieces of the puzzle of some of the events that are happening now. I think some of these events that I just talked about that we're going to discuss tie into these predictions. So first, I argued that I think this year, or if not this year, then in the next 2 to 3 years, China is going to invade Taiwan. What's your grade for me on that?
I think that's, at this point, a fait accompli. You know, we can talk about this a little bit later. I still would not be surprised if the other kind of black swan event is if one day Xi Jinping wakes up soon and he's surrounded by a cadre of rival faction that's removing him from power because they're so angry at the way that he has mishandled the domestic situation in China and gone after his rivals so heavy-handedly.
God, that is so interesting. And I remember you would know the name of this leader, but I remember I think it was the former president of China was
Hu
sitting.
Jintao.
Yes, was sitting
Yes.
in the 20th Party Congress back in October of 2022, and all of a sudden,
Yep.
all these people come in, swarm him, and take him out very publicly.
Yeah.
And you're envisioning that perhaps a similar thing could happen to Xi.
There has been for about 2 years now a internal multi-sided fight between at least two other major factions. The former president Jiang Zemin, who was before Hu Jintao, he's dead now, and I think he might have been murdered, but he was old, so we don't really know. But he was leading one faction, the Shanghai clique, and then Hu Jintao was leading another anti-Xi Jinping faction. I think it was called the Youth League faction, which is funny because they're all old. But those are the two major rival factions, and then there's within the military a host of military leaders who are very unhappy with Xi Jinping because he keeps removing all of their friends from their positions under the imprimatur of anti-corruption. But what it really is Xi's just replacing them with loyalists to Xi. And so at some point, there's going to be there already is a backlash within the party, but at some point that backlash may grow into something even more significant that, he could wake up and instead of ordering the invasion of Taiwan like he wants to, he might suddenly be getting thrown to the curb by the rival faction within the CCP.
But wouldn't the rival faction want to also invade Taiwan and restore the
Certainly.
motherland, as they often say?
Certainly. Yes, but it could also be one of those things where they remove him and their plans for invasion have to be delayed because there's too much internal chaos for them to do an invasion reliably. But I do believe your prediction is very apt about a possible Taiwan invasion scenario. I think the last time I was on your show, I said something similar as well, that I thought it was going to happen before the close of 2023. Thankfully, I was wrong. I'm very happy to be wrong. I always say that. But I think you're onto something when you say that, hey, this could be something that happens in the next year. And I would be watching probably April is when the next window is, springtime, in terms of the weather that would allow for a cross-strait invasion. The Chinese already have a sizable amphibious landing fleet. The U.S. military and intelligence networks don't acknowledge this because they don't understand it. But they look at it and say China's amphibious fleet is smaller than our own. They need considerably more vessels to do a successful landing. I always tell them the Chinese, under their military civil fusion program, they have developed their roll-on, roll-off civilian ferries that are designed to ferry large numbers of people and vehicles from one city to another. They've designed them to be military grade, and they have a huge fleet. They have the world's largest fleet of civilian ro-ro ferries that could easily be repurposed into amphibious landing vessels for an invasion of Taiwan. So you are absolutely probably correct that this could happen within the next 8 months to a year.
Well, some of the reasons that I gave were that China knows that it has a limited window to do this. Certainly,
Right, exactly.
I'm referring to, while President Biden is in office, I've even heard many liberals say that if they were, the head of China, if they were Xi Jinping, they would, invade while Joe Biden is in office, because he's demonstrated, as we've talked about, especially with the, withdrawal from Afghanistan, that he is not the most keen on foreign policy, and he's bought off by China. But other reasons I gave were that China, as you know, is experiencing a great demographic decline. They're supposed to lose half of their population in the next few decades because of the effects of the one-child policy. They're also encountering, economic instability. A lot of the factories, such as Apple, which were operating at high speed in China, are finding, alternative places. Obviously, Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy was a total disaster. So I like your kind of additional prediction that maybe Xi will have a moment. Do you think that it would be too much of wishful thinking to hope that it would be a Yeltsin replacing Gorbachev kind of moment?
No, it's not going to happen with that. And in fact, in Russia, we keep hearing as well. The Twitter, the FAFO types on Twitter, they're always hashtag Putin is dying or overthrow Putin, and it's just like that. I say no because Putin's terrible, but what will come after him will be more effective and nastier than even Putin. And I think the same thing would happen in China. I think the next group that would replace Xi might want to kind of cool tensions in the near term with America and the West, but that would just be to buy them time to set up for the inevitable invasion of Taiwan. And under that scenario, it would still happen within the next 3 to 5 years, I believe. Precisely because of what you said with those demographic issues. China has a lot of internal problems that they don't advertise. Right. So you're absolutely correct to say that the window of opportunity is closing. In fact, similar reason for why Russia invaded Ukraine when they did. There were a lot of internal considerations because they too have a demographic collapse. They too knew that this was really the last chance, the 2020s, for them to do a major military push beyond their borders. And similarly as well with Iran. Iran is currently going through a demographic collapse. They have a lot of instability at home. That regime all these regimes are basically in a use it or lose it mentality. And what greater opportunity than to have Sleepy Joe in the White House, who apparently can't even stop Venezuela from threatening neighboring Guyana. So how is he going to stop, Iran or Russia or China from threatening their neighbors?
And he not only won't stop them, he'll, in the case of Iran, give them $16 billion to help them with their causes.
That's right.
And in addition to Sleepy Joe, we now live in a time where Sleepy Joe and, the party in power has all of their, woke, anti-American, anti-Western accomplices helping them out.
Yes, which is why you can have an insurrection on the White House grounds last weekend.
Yes.
Consisting of pro-Palestine movement where they're chanting for Yemen to destroy American forces. And somehow that's not called an insurrection. But January 6th was, as terrible as January 6th was, it was nothing like what those people were doing on the White House grounds. But you now have examples of the Democratic Party aligning with anti-American interests. And, the red-green axis, the communist red meeting the green wave of the Islamists, they're working together. They have shared interests now. This is one reason why Biden is so afraid to really hit back at Iran and its proxies in the Middle East, even as they're provoking us, because not only is he wanting to make peace with Iran and accommodate them like Neville Chamberlain did with Hitler, and we know where that ends, but Biden is also worried about losing the Arab or Muslim American vote. And while they're not certainly a majority of the population, they are overwhelmingly Democratic. And actually, before October 7th attacks in Israel, many Muslim Americans were starting to look to the Republican Party over cultural issues. And that, of course, has gone to the back burner as the Israeli issue has become front and center. And so Biden is desperate to keep those voters by appealing basically to their shall I say, anti-Semitic views, which many, as we're seeing, unfortunately, in the Muslim community here in America clearly are. They have sympathies, at least, with anti-Semites.
Speaking of the situation in Israel, one of the other predictions I gave in my 2024 show, which, by the way, when I was introducing it, I advised my audience to get a glass of Chardonnay because I said all of these are kind of terrible. One of them, I think, was that no one would really care about or watch the 2024 Olympics in Paris. That was like the least bad news one. That was just kind of neutral. But as with the 2024 predictions conversation, maybe people listening should find their glass of wine now because this is bleak already. But let's shift and talk about the Israel situation, because one of my predictions was that another war would erupt in that region, whether it be between Israel and Iran, Hezbollah opening a northern front, perhaps the United States going to war with Iran over their activity in the Red Sea. Yeah. What's your grade for Julie Hartman on that?
I would say that generally, I'd say that these, both your Taiwan and your fear of a wider Middle East war, I give them an A- or an A. I think they're pretty much spot on. And in fact, this is something that I happen to believe as well. And you could make the argument, and indeed I have, you could make the argument that what we're witnessing in the Red Sea is an expansion of what we're witnessing in Iraq with Iranian missiles being fired at the U.S. consulate. We're already witnessing the expansion of the war. We're already in now the beginnings of a regional war in the Middle East, which will absolutely go global, any minute. And so I think your prediction, again, is spot on. Predictions are funny, as Yogi Berra said, even especially about the future. But I think that you seem to be on the right track here. And the very interesting thing about predictions, at least in the business I used to work in, what interested me was less the conclusion and more the methodology that brought an analyst or an individual to that conclusion. And I think that knowing you, that the work that you've done researching and understanding this topic, I think leads me to say there's a lot of credibility to your predictive capabilities. And so I would definitely score you high and say that I hope you're wrong.
I know. I love that line. It's so true. I should have prefaced my episode with that. I hope I'm wrong. I really do, but I don't know if I am. So, okay, now that we've gone through that, let's look at some of these individual geopolitical developments. And, as we've talked about, and as I've sort of hinted at in the introduction, I think that all of these are pieces of a greater puzzle. And I see the hand of China in a lot of these developments. Certainly, the Taiwan development is kind of a separate entity onto its own, because I don't think China would want to support the president who was just elected. But I, as you know, wrote an article in the Epoch Times and for the American Mind arguing that China and its accomplice Russia were likely involved. And by involved, I mean at the very least knew about it and perhaps even endorsed it and helped the October 7th massacre. And I gave all of these examples of the way that China, Russia, and Iran, alongside other countries, are really coming together to try to create an alternative, vehemently anti-Western world order, whether it's the Shanghai Cooperation Initiative, which is kind of a geopolitical alliance, or the BRICS alliance, which is that group of 11 or so countries that form an economic alliance. China just hosted the Belt and Road Initiative, where they invited all of these countries in the world except the United States and the Western Bloc. So I think all of these, again, are perhaps more interrelated than might meet the eye. So let's go in. Let's start first with Taiwan. So Taiwan just elected this new president, Lai Ching-te, who is the current vice president of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party. And in his acceptance speech, he said that this is a defining moment for Taiwan. I just want to read quickly some other things he said. Quote, "The election has shown the world the commitment of the Taiwanese people to democracy, which I hope China can understand." He went on to say that he views it as an important, quote, responsibility to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. And then he said, quote, "At the same time, we're also determined to safeguard Taiwan from continuing threats and intimidation from China." So it's clear where he stands. How do you analyze this development as far as China, Taiwan, and China-Western relations?
Well, I think it's very clear where the majority of the Taiwanese people stand. It's a very interesting development than how it was even 10 years ago, where there was a genuine, pretty even split between the DPP types that wanted independence and to operate basically as an independent country from China, and the Kuomintang party, the KMT, which wanted to be enmeshed with China, at least economically, but you and I know that that's a backdoor way for them in China to get their hands back on Taiwan. But now there's clearly now, both with the election of the previous president who was a member of the DPP, and now the election of the current president, President Lai, is a decisive majority of Taiwanese people who are saying, we don't want war with China, but we don't want to be a part of China. And we want to operate as an independent democracy, and that is precisely what they're doing now. And so obviously this is unwelcome development in Beijing, but I think that it shows you decisively where the Taiwanese are moving. And the real question is, A, what will China do ultimately in response? And B, what will the United States and the West do if China decides, as you predicted, to use military force? And that answer is very frightening. If anything, from a sort of a logistical, practical standpoint, we have blown through most of our critical supplies that Taiwan would need to facilitate their defense from China. We've blown through them in Ukraine, and we're starting to blow through them now in the Middle East, and our industrial base is not that strong. And so even if we had a leadership that really wanted to help defend Taiwan, we would not probably have the requisite equipment on hand to do that reliably. And so how would we react? And the Chinese are calculating that we would not be able or willing to react to a sudden attack by China, that they would be able to gain a foothold on the island, and once they did, that would force the Americans to sue for peace, so that they could incorporate Taiwan, which does not want to be incorporated clearly, into the greater Chinese empire.
How interesting what you just said, that the KMT party wants to be kind of closer with China, because in 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT lost the Chinese Civil War, then when the CCP won, they fled to Taiwan and set up their own country. So I would think of them as the probably most, vociferous opponents of the Chinese, but apparently not. Why did that change?
Democracy. Yeah, well, that's partly because of the generation. Remember, Chiang Kai-shek, who founded Taiwan, and the KMT, initially viewed his government in Taiwan as the only legitimate government of China. And for about 20 or 30 years after Taiwan kind of became an independent fortress from Mao's China, the Taiwanese government never said we're separate but equal from China. They said that we are the only legitimate government of both Taiwan and China. That changed, I think, in the 60s, and now it's really evolved into the Taiwanese are saying we don't want war, we just want to be left alone and be our own entity. And it's the Chinese who are saying, well, you can manage your affairs at home, internally, but like Hong Kong or Macau, but you are in fact part of the greater Chinese, prosperity sphere. It was time, it was sort of culture and generational shift that led, and a lot of corruption that led to the KMT becoming the pro-China, or at least being opposed to fighting for Taiwan's independence with China. That is really the kind of shift here that occurred. A lot of graft and a lot of time forced the two parties to the KMT party to sort of change its outlook. And it was very popular, that position they took for many years in Taiwan, particularly in the early 2000s. But now that China has grown to the point that it has, and it is exerting the kind of influence it is in the near abroad of Taiwan, they are realizing that they are being boxed out, and that they might not, if they don't resist, they might not have a choice and be absorbed into the new Chinese empire. So this democracy that they are displaying is one form of resistance.
I get conflicted about this, because on the one hand, I think, okay, it is a form of resistance. It's good for Taiwan to elect a leader that is so strongly, defensive of Taiwan's autonomy, and perhaps that will send China the message that they're not backing down. But then on the other hand, I think, oh gosh, this is provocative for China. So it seems like you think it's going to go in the latter direction.
In an ideal world, simply because of where the political moment is in America. It is not conducive to foreign entanglement, and also because of, like I mentioned, our logistical crisis that is not being talked about enough. In an ideal world, we would have a president who was respected globally and feared in the capitals of our enemies, to the point that we could tell the Chinese, we will continue to honor the one country, two systems formulation of the Shanghai Communique in 1979, where we will not openly call for Taiwan's independence, but we will, both of us, China and America, respect the idea that Taiwan is in fact independent in its operation. But unfortunately, because of the way our government is perceived right now around the world, led by, let's face it, a blithering idiot, the Chinese do not fear us, they don't respect us, and so they don't really care about whatever agreements they made with us 50 years ago. They think now is the time, with a weak American president in a divided America, now is the time for them to go for broke, and that's exactly what they're going to do. But in an ideal world, we would be able to tell the Chinese, if you don't do anything to Taiwan and you just let Taiwan be, we will not openly call for Taiwanese independence, but we will still act as if it is an independent country, which is what we were doing for about 40 or 50 years. But now the Chinese do not want it that way. They don't trust us. They don't like us. We don't trust them, rightly so. And the Taiwanese are stuck in the middle. And so now this is why the prediction of a war happening very soon, before the American election, is at hand.
Mm. Perhaps it'll be an October surprise, I mean, I remember the biggest issue of the 2020 election, COVID, didn't happen until March. Maybe it'll be a March surprise. Right. So,
well, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the one aspect here I would tell people about. I said this yesterday. I was on with one of your colleagues on Salem, Seth Leibson's show in Phoenix, and he said something similar. And I said, the one aspect here that our enemies always kind of misunderstand is that which Winston Churchill said, which is that basically America's going to do all the wrong things before it ultimately is forced to do the right thing. And so we did all the wrong things for the last 4 years by electing Biden and letting him run everything into the ground. Now the American people, I think, are waking up to the fact that they need something new, and Trump might be what they need. And I would say also, our enemies are miscalculating, because they are probably going to try to do something radical over the next year before the election. But that radical, aggressive move that any one or all of these autocratic regimes may be doing might actually kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy, where Americans look and they see how America's getting pushed around on the world stage, and they say, you know what, we may not like Trump, but we'd rather have the Mad King to Mr. Magoo. And that might actually create sort of the disaster scenario for these regimes that are challenging us, because the last thing they want really is Trump in office. And yet their crazy behavior over the last year and a half might actually prompt that reality, into existence, which would be really bad for them in the long run.
Mm-hmm. A final question on this Taiwan election. Let's say that China, our predictions do come true, though we hope we're wrong, and China does invade Taiwan. The United States has pledged its commitment to defend Taiwan against China since the Chiang Kai-shek coalition took over Taiwan in 1949. Do you think that we will defend Taiwan? Will we follow through on our commitment? And what would you say to the many Americans who, I think understandably, wonder, well, what's in it for us? We may have sympathy for the Taiwanese people. We don't like China, but why would we send our troops or our equipment or our taxpayer money to go help this small country? Before we continue with Brandon, I want to quickly tell you about MyPillow. I use a lot of MyPillow products. I wear my slippers, I sleep on a MyPillow, and I use my towels. And you can too if you use the promo code Hartman or call 1-800-566-6743. 5. My Pillow did not stop by creating the pillow. They also created the Giza Dream bed sheets. These look and feel great, which means an even better night's sleep for me, which is crucial for our overall health, and especially for me as I am a terrible insomniac. Mike Lindell found the world's best cotton called Giza. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. Mike's Giza sheets come with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. Those Giza Dream bed sheets come in a variety of sizes and colors, and Mike's incredible deal is the sale of the year. You'll get 50% off the Giza Dream sheets, and you'll get a set for as low as $29.98. That's $29.98 if you go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use the promo code Hartman. There you will get not only this great offer, but also deep discounts on all MyPillow products, including the MyPillow 2.0 mattress topper, MyPillow kitchen towel sets, and now even flannel sheets, and so much more. Call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman, or go to mypillow.com and make sure that you use the promo code Hartman. Do you think that we will defend Taiwan? Will we follow through on our commitment? And what would you say to the many Americans who, I think understandably, wonder, well, what's in it for us? You know, we may have sympathy for the Taiwanese people. We don't like China, but why would we send our troops or our equipment or our taxpayer money to go help this small country?
Right. Well, the first part of your question, I would say under present circumstances, no, the United States will not defend Taiwan. Not, at least not directly, indirectly possibly, but again, that's running up against really logistical issues. What will probably happen, that's if the Chinese don't attack U.S. assets. You know, that changes the game, because the Chinese believe that they have to hit our satellite constellations, that they have to basically initiate a massive cyber war, that they have to launch missiles at our air bases in the region. You know, that could really change the dynamic. But if the Chinese keep it very honed into Taiwan and kind of leaving the West out of it, if it's up to the United States, we will not defend Taiwan. I was talking, 3 years ago now, with a very dear friend of mine who was a very senior person at the State Department, and we were chatting about this very scenario, and his comment to me was basically, we wouldn't intervene directly, but we would be using submarines to covertly deploy weapons into the Taiwan under the noses of the invading Chinese. We would be using submarines to, covertly infiltrate U.S. Special Forces and intelligence operators to basically do sort of, behind the wire operations. But of course, those are harassing actions, and that's not going to be sufficient to roll back a Chinese invasion. And so I don't believe under present circumstances the United States would actually act in a decisive manner. At least that's what the Chinese are assuming. Maybe I'm hopefully wrong. What I would tell people who are rightly skeptical of getting involved, it will be a disaster, a war with China for both sides. And this was sort of the conclusion of, there was a book called 2034 by Admiral Stavridis and another person, I can't remember who wrote it, but that was sort of their conclusion. It was a fictional world war between the United States and China in 2034, and the conclusion was basically both sides annihilate each other, a lot like World War I, where everybody kind of knocked each other out. But what I will say is the reason that the United States and the American people, the ordinary voter, should be worried about a Chinese takeover of Taiwan is because China wants to acquire what's known as the first, second, and third island chains. And Taiwan is the beating heart of the first island chain. And if they can capture Taiwan, from Taiwan, they'll be able to basically force the Philippines probably to accommodate Chinese ambitions. And then they will also be able to turn north and harass the heck out of Japan, possibly even blockade Japan, and basically force them to kowtow to Beijing. Once they do that, they will be able to extend their their power, their naval power primarily, into the second island chain, and be able to reach down into Australia. And finally, the third island chain, which includes Hawaii, they will be able to press into and basically deny the United States a military access to the Indo-Pacific, but also be able to basically cut the United States off of trans-Pacific trade, which most of our international trade flows across those trans-Pacific waterways, and the U.S. Navy has secured those for 70 or 80 years now without any question. Now, if China is able to break out of the containment that we've had them in with Taiwan and move into those second and third island chains, you're talking about the end of America's dominant position in the world, the rise of China. And once China solidifies its grip on that third island chain, they'll be able to then really dive deep and go into Latin America, not just economically, but militarily as well. And then they'll be all up in our business, the way they think we've been in theirs for the last 60 years. And it will not be a pretty time for us, especially with our lack of border control under current conditions.
Cheerful.
Yes.
Very cheerful. Well, I was talking to you before the show about a eerie line from Nostradamus about the red enemy coming in and taking over, and perhaps he deserves the reputation for being a prophet. I just, before we move on from this, I remember I used to listen to people like you who would talk about the march of China, and I would think, oh my gosh, this is so, this is so outlandish. But this is what they're doing now. I mean, we're seeing it. They go, and I talk about this ad nauseum on this show. They go into other countries and they buy those leaders off, and they under the pretenses of helping those countries, hey, I'll build you a railroad, I'll build you schools, I'll industrialize your airport. They put their claws in and then control those countries. So that's the thing I want people to understand, is that this is right before our eyes, and China is spying on us and infiltrating our country right before our eyes, and we are so jaded that we allow them to do it. We don't care they sent over the spy balloon. We don't care that they're buying farmland. We don't care that they're spying on us with TikTok. We don't care that they bought off our leaders. We don't care that they have a spy base on Cuba. They're doing it in front of us. So the people who cry conspiracy theories need to just open their eyes. That's my sermon.
Yeah. The former head of the Bin Laden unit at CIA, I was on his podcast, and it was after we finished chatting. I basically said to him, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but he said, no, you don't sound like a conspiracy theorist. You sound like somebody who can read the room. Yeah. And he said, that we're beyond conspiracy theories now, and we're now in the period of actual conspiracies. It's not a theory anymore. And one of those theories and one of those conspiracies is this great coordination between China, Russia, Iran, and even Venezuela and countries like Turkey, and North Korea, which are all predicated on basically, displacing American power and pushing us out from all these different parts of the world, isolating us and making us basically on the defensive, losing ground everywhere. That's what they want, and that's what they're executing now, an agenda. And you see this at play everywhere. And in China, the big push for them will be to take those island chains. And the American people need to understand that if Taiwan falls, that's an open highway basically for China to go right up to Hawaii and to basically, really start, taking apart the American-led world order. And at that point, that's when you'll start seeing the rise of this BRICS economic alliance that's designed to take out the dollar. You'll really start seeing the end, not only of the American order, but you'll see really the sort of the diminishing of America into a second or third rate power, and certainly a third world country in terms of lack of prosperity.
God. Again, cheerful, so cheerful.
But it can change. But yes. I want to make it clear.
Yes.
This is sort of the drum I'm beating for the next year, and it's going to be very annoying for people. But the off ramp, there's one off ramp left, and that's the November election. And if it is a free and fair election, I believe that Trump will win, And I think that people will hold their noses. I know he's very unpopular with sort of independents and whatnot, but there's going to be 4 states that determine this election. And really, it's going to come down to about 150,000 people, I think. And I think that they will break for Trump because they don't like what they're seeing. And if we can put Trump in for another 4 years, and as long as he picks the right people this time, I think we can avoid these nightmare scenarios. I think all of the autocrats will stand down and bide their time because they're too afraid of Trump. They're not afraid of Mr. Magoo. They're not afraid of Joe Biden, but they are afraid of Donald Trump because he is the mad king. And that sort of madness is what we need right now on the world stage. And then at home, he can reverse almost all of this economic decline within a year. I mean, look at what he was able to do after COVID when he started rebuilding the economy. Look at what he did after he took over for Obama. They said what he achieved couldn't be achieved. Obama said this in 2015. A year and a half after that, Trump's been the president, and he made this economy the best economy since the 1960s. So this guy knows what he's doing, as crazy and unstable as he may be to some people. If we can get him in office for another 4 years, I think we will see a reversal of all of these nightmares that are coming true right now under Biden.
Let's pray.
I do every day.
I'm trying to, but I'm not always the best at it. So let's shift now to a different, but as I often say, related development, because China is everywhere. Its hand is everywhere, right in front of us, very obviously. Let's talk about Iran seizing this oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman. And again, I want to ask the question for people who are going, okay, yep, we know we don't like Iran. We know Iran is funding anti-American, anti-Israel activity. It's funding terrorism. But okay, they seize one oil tanker in this Gulf that most people can't even pinpoint on a map. What's the big deal? What is the big deal, Brandon?
Well, so this is why I tell people the Middle East is, it's like the Godfather 3, Al Pacino. Every time I think I'm out, they keep bringing me back in. And so that's sort of America in the Middle East, because I'm the first one to say, I've had friends who've been killed over there. I'd be the first one to say that I want us out of the Middle East as best as possible. But we're never going to be fully out of the Middle East. And look at that map there. That is one of the most heavily trafficked world trade routes. And whether America is there or not, the world will still depend on these waterways cutting through the Middle East. So it's not just oil and natural gas. It's also these waterways. They're called oil transit choke points, and there's about 7 or 8 of them in the world. And I think 4 of them maybe, are in the Middle East. And one of them cuts right through Iran, the Strait of Hormuz. You've got the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, which is off the coast of Yemen. You've got some of these waterways like the Gulf of Oman. All of these are used pretty heavily by the world. And the reason they're used is because it cuts down on travel time for goods going between Asia and Europe and the rest of the world. And what the Iranians have done with their Houthi proxies, they have managed to basically force most world shipping to reroute around the Horn of Africa, adding weeks and possibly months onto the journey of goods, which only means increases in prices on you and I. At the same time, the instability of the Middle East has jacked up the cost of oil. Oil is already expensive right now under Joe Biden thanks to his idiotic regulations. Now we have the added influx of not only war in Ukraine, which is spiking the price of certain commodities and agricultural goods, but it's now also the war in the Middle East is spiking the price of oil. And so now you have this issue where this is going to affect, for a long time until this crisis abates, this is going to affect the wallets of ordinary Americans at a time when most ordinary Americans are struggling to get by in Joe Biden's economy. And so that's why we should want to nip this crisis in the bud. We do not have to go to war with Iran to end this thing. What we need to do is blast the heck out of the Houthis in Yemen. Tell Hezbollah, if you guys open up a northern front, we're going to use our air power to clip your wings. You've got a lot of supply chains coming out of Iran through Iraq and Syria into Lebanon, which is where Hezbollah is based. If you guys open up a northern front, we will let the Israelis attack you in Lebanon, and then we'll hit your supply chains coming out of Iran, and you guys won't be able to wage war because you won't have the stuff to do it. And then what we need to do also is we need to tell the Saudis, we need to use our leverage over the Saudis and the Arabs to say we need to complete the Trump-era Abraham Accords. We need to unite the Sunni Arab world with Israel to contain Iran in the same way that we created NATO to contain the Soviet Union in the Cold War. And I think we're almost there. And what they're looking for in that region is for the superpower to actually display strength and competence. And under Biden, we have displayed weakness and incompetence, and that is the worst possible way to appear to that region. So we would need to have a change of leadership to be able to do what I'm saying, but we can get there. And we can stop this, because once you stop the targeting of shipping, it'll help with our prices at home. And that's why it's important to worry about what goes on in these waterways.
I was not alive or even close to being alive during the 1973 OPEC embargo, but so I understand it was a very bad event with long lines and absurdly high, gas prices. And it's just interesting to reflect, especially people my age, we don't even conceive that something like that could happen to us, because we've never lived through anything like that. But this is one of their weapons. We were talking about China's weapon against us is, spying. A lot of countries' weapon against us is the border. Certainly, many other, powers are funding or trying to, push this homegrown anti-American wokeism. But another huge weapon that we should not underestimate is our reliance on oil. President Biden entreated to the Saudis, entreated to the Venezuelans, because apparently it's okay for them to drill and send it to us, but it's bad for climate change if we drill here. So we have to remember this is such a thing that they have over us.
Yes. Well, I would also remind your audience that they actually, and this I wrote about in my book, The Shadow War, and I finished writing that in May of 2021. It was released finally in July of 23, but that was because we had edits and everything we were doing behind the scenes. But and then Hurricane Ian hit my house, and I couldn't focus on the edits. I had to worry about fixing our house. But my point is that I brought up in that book what Iran was doing during the Trump years, where they were attacking Saudi oil refineries like Abqaiq. They were going after shipping, and that ended within a year and a half because Trump basically killed their leaders. He started killing top Iranians. Obviously, he got General Qasem Soleimani, who was the biggest one that he got of the Iranian cadre. And the Iranians were afraid. They were afraid that Trump was going to keep clipping all of their leaders. And basically, they didn't want to die. And so they stood down and they waited him out. And now they have a more pliant person in the White House, somebody who actually wants to work with the head choppers in Iran rather than kill them. And they are now doing the same tactics again, only this time the tactics are immensely more successful because the White House isn't pushing back. They don't fear the White House. Something your audience may not know, we made a big show of blowing up the Houthis in Yemen after weeks of not doing anything to all of their aggression. What people don't know is that something like 70% of the Houthis' assets that were targeted in those airstrikes did not get destroyed. And that's because Joe Biden, on the eve of the attacks, called the leaders of the Houthis and told them where we were going to strike and when we were going to strike. And the Houthis then basically spent that whole time moving most of their assets and key personnel out of the way of our bombs. So
why did he do that?
Well, because there's a Democrat mentality when it comes to using force. They like to be able to say that it was precise and surgical and they minimized casualties and all this. They like to put on a show. They like to pretend like they're tough without actually risking, collateral damage or anything like that. And also, I think it's just incompetence. But Bill Clinton was famous for this. Now, I wasn't alive in 1973 either, but I was alive in the 90s. And while the 90s were a wonderful time to be alive, the foreign policy of Bill Clinton was not that great. And one of the things he used to do with Al-Qaeda in the 90s was he would sort of telegraph what he was going to do to them. He would delay, and then he'd fire one cruise missile, basically target picking, everything into the last minute, giving the Al-Qaeda types time to escape, which is why Al-Qaeda became the threat it became, because we were paying all this attention to them and then we're seen as ineffective when going after them. It's the same thing with Iran today. Obama did this to a lesser extent as well, but Biden is really carrying on the Bill Clinton legacy of, basically putting on a big show without actually accomplishing anything. And this is a huge failure of his foreign policy.
So to quickly synopsize the implications of the Iran or Iranian-backed events, Iran seizing the oil tanker in the Red Sea, and then the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels firing missiles and drones into the Red Sea to destroy, vessels carrying commercial items and oil. That is intended to diminish American power, to seize or at least try to control that area, to have leverage over shipping routes, and to potentially curb our access to oil because they know that we are beholden to them for that very important resource. Is that fair?
Yes, and this is all being done with a geopolitical end in sight. The Iranians are desperate to weaken our standing permanently in the region so that they can rise to the top of the food chain of the region with the backing of Russia and China. And this is another reason why Iran is attacking our allies like Israel and the Saudi government, because they're trying to weaken our reach. And all of this is part of not only a geopolitical ambition, which on paper, obviously it's awful, but it's very logical. That's what makes sense why they're doing this. But this is also married to a very, I think, personally irrational religious view, 12er Shiite view, which is that the Iranian government must create as much chaos in the world in order to free their Mahdi, their Messiah, from his hiding spot that he's been in for 500 plus years. And once they can create enough chaos, the Mahdi will come, smite the unbelievers, and then elevate the Iranians to being the kings of the new heaven on earth, because as they are the true believers. And so you have that rational geopolitical ambition, which is a threat to us, married to an utterly irrational eschatological vision of basically bringing about the apocalypse so that their Mahdi can come save us. And I will add one other thing, since we're talking eschatology. Their description of their Messiah is the exact same description that the Christians have for their Antichrist. So if we're looking at this in religious terms even, this is a very scary moment. And that's why I say it is not Ukraine, it is not Taiwan that's going to trigger a third world war. It's Iran in the Middle East.
So help me understand, because this is totally new to me. Where do they believe this person is? I know you just said it, but I missed it.
Yeah. So it's the 12th Imam, and basically, and I talk about this really in the book, the history of it. Basically, when Muhammad died in the 7th century, there was a succession crisis. Who would rule the caliphate?
Right.
And the Sunnis said it has to be, the next leader has to be chosen by basically the wisest of all Muslim scholars. And the Shiites said no. The Muhammad is divine. His bloodline is therefore divine.
The Fatimid
and it should be
caliphate.
Yes, exactly. So then that led to the Sunni-Shiite split. The Shiites, being a minority in the Sunni-dominated Middle East, found themselves basically living under, I want to say it was, I think at this point, the Abbasid dynasty based out of Iraq. And the Abbasids were holding the 11th Imam of sort of like their Pope in Shia Islam, was holding their religious leader prisoner. And the rumor is, and they killed him, but the rumor is that before the 11th Imam died, he had a child, the 12th Imam, who is the Messiah. He's the promised one in the Shiite view of Islam, and that he will basically, bring justice and balance to the Islamic world and destroy the apostate Sunnis and elevate the Shiites to their rightful place. And what happened was, because he was never found, this 12th Imam, the Shiites came up with this kind of myth that he is in a divine hiding. He's in occlusion, waiting for the signal of chaos in the rest of the world that would have him free himself and come like an avenging superhero to save the Shiites in their moment of chaos.
Cheerful.
That's what you're dealing with, though.
I know. No, and that is really important for us to understand, because to our Western minds, the commitment that many of these individuals, all of these individuals, have to their religion is completely inconceivable to us. Yes. I mean, they view the world in a dramatically different way.
Right.
And that has everything to do with the decisions they make.
When they call us Satan, they're not just saying that because for a shorthand.
Yes.
It's not. They're not saying it the way that liberals call us Nazis on the right. They're saying it because, like, they actually believe we are possessed by demons and they must vanquish us in a new crusade. That is what you're dealing with, and that is why Obama and Biden and Carter before them were so wrong in trying to negotiate with such a regime, because you will never get a fair deal from them under any circumstances. You can only kill that regime.
How big of a deal is the Iranian ballistic missile strike near the U.S. consulate in Iraq?
Well, it's certainly a signal. A, they're not afraid. Because of the reason that we have a horrible president. And B, I've been telling people, there's all these reports about, I think it was Pompeo was saying, he was at Hudson Institute recently saying that, they're going to get nukes now. And I keep telling people, you don't understand. The Iranians already have rudimentary nukes. That's not the issue. The issue is, can they take those nuclear warheads and A, make them more sophisticated, which the Obama-Biden nuclear deal would allow for them to do that legally. And the real issue, though, is those ballistic missiles. They have been perfecting them. They have been making them able to hit farther targets. They now, with their space program, and yes, Iran has a space program, are placing satellites in orbit that will allow for them to have greater over-the-horizon command and control capabilities, therefore expanding and extending their reach with their weapons systems beyond the Middle East even and into farther places. And so the ballistic missile attack, I think, is a portent of things to come, and I think it's a very scary indicator of just how sophisticated the Iranian ballistic missile and nuclear weapons program has become, and that's even under sanctions. Biden wants to remove most of the sanctions and integrate Iran into the wider community of nations, allowing them to have normalized trade relations and all of that, which means that will speed up their advances in ballistic missile and nuclear weapons technology bigly.
All of these developments that we've been talking about, as you just said, are indicative of things to come. Iran seizing the oil tanker in the Gulf of Oman, launching the ballistic missile strike near the U.S. consulate in Iraq, funding the Houthis and sending the missiles and drones into the Red Sea, and then Taiwan's new president. It's important, I think, to understand these developments along the way, because they may not seem like the biggest of deals compared to all of the other craziness that is happening, but they're laying the groundwork.
I would also watch out for North Korea. I think there's going to be a twin crisis soon in the Indo-Pacific, where China's threatening Taiwan and North Korea is doing something to South Korea. I would keep an eye on the Venezuelan Guyana issue. That could create the biggest refugee flow coming up through our southwestern border in history. And I would be watching the Russia-Ukraine war. Zelensky is now suing for peace. He should have done this after he won the fight for Kyiv a year and a half ago. Now he's negotiating from a position of weakness. I predict that Russia will take eastern Ukraine and Crimea, and whatever's left of Ukraine will basically be a pre-failed state beholden to the West, completely unable to function as a normal state. So we are entering a very, very tragic period of human history. Again.
Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day, at least.
Have a glass of scotch.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you very much for coming on and for making sense of all of this. And as you say, it can be reversed. Sometimes I just wonder, like, why is it that hard? I mean, I understand that we could talk about Trump all day, but I understand he is his own worst enemy. He says despicable things. There are things that he does that all of us hate. But my gosh, we're in a civilizational moment. Is it that hard to understand that and go with the strong candidate?
We are a decadent people, and we have not known in our lifetimes the kinds of hardships that my grandparents and great-grandparents did. And so, yes, we can. Look at Rome. Look at all of the decadence. So, yes. The question is, though, if we can get it right, we get another lease on life. If we get this one wrong in November, or if it's stolen, that's it. The Republic's gone. We're something else, and we are not a great power anymore. We are a declining power in a Chinese-led world.
Brandon, Thanks for coming on. And everybody needs
Thanks
to
for having
follow
me.
Brandon on Twitter. You're so funny on Twitter at We the Brandon. And as a reminder, please do order any of Brandon's books. I've read all 3. They're fantastic. Winning Space, How America Remains a Superpower, Biohacked, China's Race to Control Life, and The Shadow War, Iran's Quest for Supremacy. Fortunately for buying purposes, but unfortunately for our civilization, as I often say, they are now more relevant than ever. And I hope that you will write to me at julie@julie-hartman.com. I always love hearing from you, and I'll see you soon. Take care.